All right. Welcome everyone to day 2 of I for Design, hosted by ACM Design. So today our special feature event is a student speaker series with 2 talented designers who are on the call with me right now. And so the way this will kind of work is I'll have them introduce themselves. We'll ask a couple general questions about design, so like how they got into design, resources that they have, all the way till like a bit more technical questions like how to get started on a portfolio. Then we'll kind of ask one-on-one about like graphic design questions if you're on that track, or product design questions. We do have a lot more product designers on the call and within the competition over graphic designers, but I think if you're building out a prototype and whatnot, it's nice to have your own graphics. So either or, I hope that both sections will be useful. And then we'll close out with an advice kind of column or a couple advice questions, and then head into audience questions. We do have a couple questions that were sent in earlier today. And then if you have any other questions throughout this whole event, or any follow-up questions on any of the answers that our speakers provide, feel free to drop them in chat. I'll be monitoring chat as we go along. So any other questions, anything you're curious about, or you want someone to explain a technical term, if like user persona comes up and you're like, what's that? I'm new to design, I don't know what that is. Feel free to ask. There's safe space. Nothing's like, no judgment at all. Ask anything. We're here to help you. So with that being said, round of applause for our 2 wonderful, talented queen designers. Woo! And I'll have them introduce themselves. So name, pronouns, year, major, organizations you're involved here, whether that be design related or not, past works that you've done, internships, jobs, whatnot. So I'll pass it off to Colleen first, and then we'll go to Alex.
Hello, super nice to meet all of you guys. I'm Colleen. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently a 3rd year, and my major is cognitive science and specializing in computing. I'm currently mainly involved with product space on campus. In the past, I've also been heavily involved with like ACM design. Also, this was like, I guess, way in the past, like 2 years ago, like creative labs and data res. So definitely like those are all design focused. And then where I've interned / worked, this past summer I interned at Salesforce, working mainly on the Quip and Slack teams. I'll also be returning to the Slack team this next summer. And I've also done, I did contract work for Stanford Medicine over the course of my sophomore year of my sophomore year of my sophomore year of college, sorry. And then I don't know if this counts as organizations or work experience, but I also did 2 quarters with UCLA's Human Computer Interaction Lab on campus.
Nice, so well-rounded. I think that you'll find that's like with us, a lot of UCLA people, we just decide to just do 10,000 different things. So Alex, your turn to flex on us.
Thank you for that. So, my name is Alex. I'm a 2nd year cognitive science major, and I'm a DH or digital humanities minor. Right now, I am working at Daily Bruin as the graphics editor, and I'm also working as a UI UX designer at Creative Labs. In terms of other past experience, I've worked as an interviewer and graphic designer for the Peace Project, which is an online organization for Asian Americans, which is super fun and super cool experience. And again, kind of like what Crystal said, we kind of just join whatever seems interesting in that moment, which was a super fun experience. So nice to meet you all. And I forgot to mention, but my pronouns are she, her.
Nice. I know that cognitive science might be a common major throughout other universities and campuses, and seeing that a lot of students who are participating are from different campuses, but digital humanities, what in the world is that?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's honestly a super cool minor that we have here at UCLA. Honestly, the classes are a little bit hard to get in. So I've only been able to get in one, which was Digital Humanities 101. But I think it really gives a good idea of what the class is. So basically what we do is it's a data analysis project on pretty much any topic that pertains to the humanities. So in our case, I personally did it on Airbnb research and how that contributes to gentrification in certain areas. But a lot of people had other things such as, I believe, accessibility of technology within different districts in LA, which is super cool. So it's always like these data-driven data-driven projects, but they always have like a human and social center to them. So it's super, super exciting, something that I would highly recommend you guys to look into if you're here at UCLA. And I think that there's also a few online classes that you can take like through cross curriculum if you're from a different UC campus. So highly recommend that as well.
Nice. We'll go into a bit of like, how much your background matters within design a bit later, but in terms of just general design questions, how did you both get started in design, or when did you get started? Did you start designing, straight out of like middle school, high school, and it's continuing passion, or is this something that you discovered in college? Yeah, so like kind of like tell us a little bit about your design story, and I'll start with Alex first.
Yeah, so I guess my design journey kind of started a little bit in middle school. It started, I was absolutely obsessed with this one software called SketchUp, which if you guys know what it is, it's basically where you it's like a 3D modeling, but it's usually used more towards like architecture, interior design, that kind of stuff. But man, like you guys, the grip that software had on me was ridiculous. But I was like, okay, this is cool to be making buildings, but is there any other digital software I can use to make more art, more design focused things? And so with that interest in mind, when I went to high school, I started to be interested in graphic design. And luckily for me, we happened to have a class called graphic design, which is where I learned Illustrator, which was super fun, again, it was one of those like hyper fixated softwares that I had. I loved Illustrator just as much as I did SketchUp. So because I love that so much, I joined my graphics team at our school newspaper. In terms of design experience and organizations we had on campus for high school, that was pretty much the only thing you could do for graphic design, which was super cool. It ended up being great for me. So I did graphics for my high school as a freshman and sophomore, and then in my junior, senior years, I was the head of graphics there. And last year as a freshman, I joined Daily Bruin as a graphics contributor. And for those of you who are a little unfamiliar with that terminology, we just call a contributor pretty much anybody who regularly contributes to the paper and has fully gone through intern training, which involves stuff like media law, News 101, that kind of stuff. And right now I'm working as the top graphics editor at Daily Bruin, which is super cool. I got to meet so many cool people there as well. And I've also been able to join creative labs for the past 2 quarters. So now I'm working as a UI and UX designer there. And in my free time, I am currently working on redesigning the website for Asian Youth Act, which is another Asian American organization that mainly runs online. So that's super cool. And that's kind of where I'm at in my design journey right now.
Nice. Okay, so Alex is the one person who's kind of using her college experience to continue her journey within design. And Colleen, how about you?
For me, it was kind of, maybe I wouldn't say the opposite, but definitely like I definitely was not a designer since young. I grew up honestly like just not being interested in anything like artistic on any level. I really like never thought of myself as a creative person. I think in general, just the concept of creativity was very daunting to me. But and honestly, even now, I don't consider myself a particularly creative person. I think I approach design from a more analytical standpoint, which I can talk more about a little bit more about later. But I guess I just did like want to preface before I start with anything that like you definitely don't have to like feel like you're the most creative person in the entire universe. You don't have to know how to paint or like draw like incredibly well to like want to dabble in design. There's definitely like a lot of it's a very interdisciplinary and like there's a lot of layers to different designs. So definitely like don't be intimidated by it. But so yeah, I came into college actually wanting to be a lawyer, but then it wasn't until the summer until my freshman year where I started actually like evaluating my skill set and just recognizing like, oh, like what's the lifestyle that I want to have for myself, like from here on out, what am I genuinely passionate about outside of like a romanticized lens of things, and just trying to be a little bit more realistic about my future. So by the time I actually like my first month into college, I recognized like, oh, like it's probably best for me to actually like just start blank and like try to explore different things that I'm passionate about, and just be a little bit more realistic about my future and like what I'm good at. So then I just spent like a lot of my freshman fall quarter just going to like a bunch of different clubs on campus. I remember I went to a lot of like Bruin entrepreneurs events. I went to a lot of like creative labs events. They would just all these orgs had a lot of like like similar events to this actually, where it's just like a showcase of like different industries, and I just went to all of them. And it was actually like a creative labs event. It was a careers and design panel that intrigued me a lot. That was the first time I'd ever heard of user experience design. Growing up, I never knew this was even an industry. So it was just really fascinating to me. And I guess that's like kind of where I fell in love with design. For me, I really fell in love with like the creative problem solving aspect of it. I just thought it was really, really fascinating, the amount of intentionality and thought that went behind design decisions. So that's kind of like where I fell in love with design. I really fell in love with user research at first, and then it kind of like throughout the past like couple years, like my passion within the UI UX spectrum has shifted. But I really did initially fall in love with user research, and then from there I was able to I had the privilege of joining a lot of orgs. ACM design was actually one of the orgs that really like I don't know, like birthed me as a designer, because the first time I ever opened Figma was actually at an ACM design meeting. I think Crystal was actually there. So that was like literally like taught me everything I know. So definitely like I'm very privileged to have been like part of these organizations.
Nice. So we have two very different perspectives as designers, which is kind of perfect for this next question. So I know a lot of people who are participating are either just getting started in design, or maybe they're like Colleen, making a career switch, whether that be early in their college years or maybe later. So as you guys are both kind of like learning about design at any point of your career, or even finding work to like making this like passion project into an actual career, what are some challenges that you both face, you know, in any time of that timeline, from getting started to now like finding work, like anything of the sort? And we'll start with Colleen.
Truthfully, I felt like it was all pretty difficult. Like, I think a large part of it is because I have no background in design. I also don't study design, and I think UCLA now has like a user experience class, but I remember when I was a freshman, there was actually like nothing that was like accessible to like my academic career as a freshman at that time. So it was all kind of like in my hands, which is like kind of for better and for worse. But I would say the biggest challenge was really just like knowing what to do and how to do it. I relied a lot on like UX Planet back then. I read a lot of articles and a lot of blogs. I still do now. I find them really helpful, but that's kind of where I got everything. I spent a long time just literally just like stalking other designers and seeing what they've done, seeing how they like their journeys. And I think that was like the biggest challenge, just really like not having as much guidance as like I would have liked in terms of like the learning curve, because as much as like I think design is one of the most beautiful things about product design in particular is that like everything you need to know is online. There's a YouTube video for like every software you would want to learn. There's articles to teach you about every possible like design process you would want to take, or every possible like design methodology that people utilize. So it's definitely really nice, but it is definitely also tough like when there's no guidance, like someone holding your hand like the way you would get if you were in like a design program. So I would say that I would say honestly also like recruiting was really tough for me, because I just didn't know what was going on. Like I remember there was just so many like especially with design, they have so many different like design interviews. They have like whiteboarding challenges, just take home design projects. Like I remember for one of like my design interviews, I actually had like no idea what was going on. I had no idea what to expect. And like back then I was also too scared to ask. So I would just like go into everything like, you know, just ready to like do whatever. So I think those were like my biggest challenges in terms of my design journey, which is really just like freedom is empowering in a sense, but it's also like kind of intimidating.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. The recruitment struggle, there's just so many aspects. Everything's different. You apply, there's like interaction design, motion design, visual design. You're like, I just getting started and this is very overwhelming. So I totally feel you on that. And Alex, how about you?
Yeah, I actually had a pretty similar experience to Colleen as well, because I think I always kind of thought of graphic design as something that I just kind of did as a hobby. I never thought that I would be here in college, like kind of pursuing that route. So I think for me, I kind of always pushed off, like, what do you want to do when you get older? Like that question was the dreaded question at Thanksgiving. And I'd always be like, oh, yeah, I'm still thinking about it. I'm still young or whatever, right? But then when I got to UCLA and also kind of just in my senior year of high school as well, I started learning a little bit more about UI UX design, which for me, I think kind of a difficult thing for me was realizing that, oh, I have this experience in graphic design, but that doesn't automatically like translate to UI UX. So like right now, even now, like a lot of my experience is more in the graphic design field. So, and similarly to Colleen as well, I don't really have any mentors on that end for like the UI UX front. So it was, again, doing a lot of online resources. And it's kind of a double-edged sword by how much information there is out there, because like, it's like, oh my God, if you have a question, like we have the answer for you. But the problem for me was like, I don't even know what I don't know. Like, I don't even have a question to ask because there's so much. And like, you just kind of, I guess for me, it was just getting started is just really the difficult part for that as well. And I would say, just to kind of take it back a bit to the graphic design aspects, I think for me, when I was getting started, it was just like getting to practice more and more with Illustrator, because I don't think that like Adobe Illustrator has a little bit of a steeper learning curve compared to some of the other design resources and softwares out there. And another thing is that it is quite expensive, so I didn't have it at home, and my time practicing it was limited to like the one class period I had of graphic design. So I think that was definitely a challenge there, like the limited resources aspect of it. And I would also say that this comes from not even like just graphic design, but for almost anything I do, it's always frustrating to see such a large gap between like what you're currently able to do versus like what other people are making. And of course, like I think we'll open up this discussion later about like imposter syndrome, that sort of thing. So, but for me, it was always just like the lack of experience I saw on my end versus just how much is out there and how much I have to learn. So that was kind of a challenge for me.
Yeah, and totally understand. I think that's what we all kind of go through starting out and comparing ourselves to very talented designers who seem to be light years ahead of us. But I want everyone to know that like we all start somewhere, and I hope this event is like a place for you to kind of get your foot in the door. And then you both mentioned resources too. So Colleen mentioned UX Planet, and I know you've mentioned in the past in our conversations about design, reading a lot of Medium articles. So between the two of you, any other kind of recommendations in terms of resources to look out for as a starter or as a beginner, whether that be developing technical skills or understanding design theory? Both of you feel free to chime in.
I think for graphic design, I honestly love Pinterest. I know that's kind of a basic thing, but it is a really great place to kind of get started. There's another website called Designspiration, which is very, very similar to Pinterest, but it has more of like a graphic design focus. And it also weeds out like all the ads that you see on Pinterest. And it's also really cool because you can search. There's a, I guess, more enhanced, I guess you could say, search feature. So you can search things by color, by like style or type of design. So I think that's something really great. I don't think they just have graphic design too. I think they have a lot of other like 3D motion graphics there, patterns, color palettes, pretty much anything. So that's really great if you're looking for design inspiration.
I think for me, in terms of like design inspiration, when I first started out, I remember I relied a lot on Dribbble and Behance. I think there's a lot of good stuff out there, but I do think that there's also like a darker side to both of those, which is more like the dribblification of like design, or people creating work just to be posted on these sites, and just because it kind of became like a social media after the it kind of became a social media in which people try to like blow up on the site as well. Definitely like nothing wrong with that as well, but I do think that it, like there's a lot of like interesting stuff going on around like these specific platforms. So definitely also like I guess just keep that in mind when you utilize those two platforms in particular. Something I've really enjoyed doing recently is I'll find like designers that I really respect and admire, and I really like just like looking through their portfolios, especially the ones with like more complex case studies. And a lot of these people will be people who have been in industry for like 10 plus years. So it's really cool to see like the thought process that they worked on, because a lot of them work on like products that I've been using for years, and just seeing that like, oh, like you were part of the team that like rolled out this feature. That's really interesting that you did it because of X, Y, and Z. And another thing I really like doing is that a lot of companies will have open source design systems, and they'll also have like design blogs. So like something you can definitely do is just search up like some of your favorite companies in terms of design. Just name a few. I think Spotify has a really strong design team. Uber, Apple, like they have just like, from like me personally, just like as a user, I've always admired their design systems. So just searching like, oh, Uber design system or Uber design. I'll actually like drop some links below as well, because of just some of my favorite ones. But I really just enjoy reading through like their case studies, their articles talking about why they chose to do certain things, and also just like different phenomena that they choose to write about. It's just really interesting to me. And also like I really like looking at the design systems and seeing why they chose to do like, oh, like why is this like 8 pixels instead of 10, and just seeing like the different typefaces they use.
Nice. And we'll be sure to ping or send out all those resources afterwards as well. And a couple that I would like to add are, I always say Built for Mars has a lot of interesting case studies because it really shows the thought process designers have on different features. So like, especially for user experience, like why does navigating this feature in this way compared to this way is better. There's like never like a right answer, but there's always a better answer. And so it really gets you in the mind of like understanding experience through design. So I will plug that in afterwards as well. All right.
Yeah,
So
sorry.
Go
Sorry
for it,
for just one more came to mind. I also like to follow like people who have been in industry for a long time, similar to Colleen, but I also sometimes like to look at people who are just starting out in the industry. And what's really great is there's this one website called Cofolio that shows you the portfolios and insights to people who are recently interning at certain companies. They have a lot of the main tech companies like Google, Apple, you name it, they have it there. So I think that's also like really cool insight to have, and kind of balance like, oh my gosh, this is what a professional is thinking versus this is someone who kind of started in UI UX recently, or product or anything like that. So that's another really fun website to look at too. So I'll throw that in I guess we can send that out later as well.
Yes.
Just wanted to add that one there.
All right. So both of you have mentioned, getting heavily involved with organizations on campus, and obviously that provides design work. And then you've probably done a couple things on the side as well. So especially for someone who's just starting out and needs, like you kind of need experience to get better opportunities, but to get better opportunities, you need experience, that kind of like chicken and egg problem. So how would you guys recommend kind of navigating through that situation? Because, maybe as someone who's looking in the audience, they're like, wow, you guys are so like, you have so many opportunities and you guys are killing it out there with all these different places where you work and you intern, and all these opportunities that kind of you just seem to have, right? But how was that kind of like journey towards getting all this work experience? Like, where should people start looking? Like, what's a great way for people to like start getting experience? And then I'll pass it off to Alex first.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest contributor towards me developing my skills was definitely my time at newspaper. I mentioned it before, but I've been doing newspaper for a while now, since my high school. But I guess in a sense, some people don't traditionally think of like newspaper as the spot to get design experience. And I totally get where that comes from. But one thing that I really liked about it is that it lets me work with so many different sections, and thereby making so many different types of content and having a lot of different themes that I can work towards. So it doesn't necessarily have to be newspaper, but I think getting in any organization that lets you work in a team is super great, especially because a lot of times when you're doing design, especially graphic design, sometimes that can be a little bit more of a solo job. Sometimes you get wrapped up in whatever your design preferences are. So I really like the fact that things like newspaper, honestly, any organization like ACM or product space as well, like we get to work with different teams, different people. And I think that really helps kind of further your design thinking. I would also say that my time at newspaper was really helpful just because of the sheer amount of graphics that I would have to pump out. And obviously it's quality over quantity always, but sometimes when you're a student, you get caught up in stuff. Sometimes you personally don't have the discipline to keep practicing, but if you have like these obligations, like these graphic requests that you have to push out, they kind of, I don't want to say force because I think that's kind of a negative connotation, but they really they hold you accountable for practicing your design skills. And I think that's honestly been so helpful for me. So yeah, I think the main organization that helped me develop my skills would be newspaper. But I would also say that sometimes when you're creating for other people, of course, you get to learn how to work with other people, but sometimes it's draining creatively to work for someone else without having to having a project that's originally and organically your own. So I also kind of balance that by creating my own personal projects. Lately, I've been really into making animated wallpapers for my screen, my phone. There you go. So that's something that I like to do on the side as well, and it's something that kind of keeps me in the creative mindset, and it kind of just keeps my passion for graphic design. I say that unironically. It keeps it going for me personally. So I think having a team setting where you can learn your skills and a personal projects kind of aspect where you can kind of create exactly what you want and just focus on the things that you're super passionate about. I think that was a really great balance for me, and would highly recommend it to anyone who's getting started out as well.
Yes, personal projects. And that's something I urge a lot of people who are just getting started into design to take a look at. So what are some current products that you use? And do you ever get that feeling of oh, I wish I could do it like this, or I wish this product had this? And that would be a great personal project for you right there. And then kind of segueing that into kind of the product design space. Colleen.
I think for me, because I started a little bit later, I guess just in college, I think I was honestly just really lucky. I was really lucky that a lot of a couple of the student orgs on campus, I guess, kind of took a chance on me, because honestly, in retrospect, I don't know why anyone would have accepted me into a student org at that time, in particular, because I had absolutely nothing on my resume. I didn't even know Figma existed. I didn't know anything back then, and I was just honestly really lucky and very privileged that a couple student orgs took a chance on me. So I was able to get a little bit of experience there. ACM did teach me a lot of my early Figma chops, and product space really gave me a comprehensive education on product design in particular as well. And just through those orgs, for ACM, I did much more graphic work. I did more graphic work, and through product design, I did more UI UX or product work. So definitely, I think every org on campus has a little bit different, in terms of if you apply to their design team, what type of design you'll be doing. So definitely I think that there's such an amazing selection of design orgs on campus where you can dibble dabble in different forms of design, especially if you're still exploring and not sure which one suits you best. I definitely learned that I'm not good at graphic design, nor do I, I'm just not good at that. So I think that's very valuable as well, to learn that you're not super passionate about a certain discipline. Something I would really recommend doing is doing design challenges and doing design competitions. Oh, similar to this one actually. But I remember when COVID hit, I was still a freshman. So then I just had nothing better to do. And then me and one of my friends, Brandon, who was also in both product space and ACM at the time with me, we just did a bunch of design competitions together. So we did Adobe Creative Jams. We did a Duke hackathon that we just somehow randomly found. And it was a really great experience for me. That was actually the first time I learned how to use prototyping tools outside of just Dissolve. That was the first time I learned how to that was honestly it was one of the design competitions in which I learned how to do interaction design further than just X goes to Y. So overall, would really recommend those. And they're also almost always free, and just no stakes either. It's just what can you lose? And there's just so much to gain regardless of any potential results or awards. Just the learning experience in and of itself, I think is very beautiful. And then also I would really recommend daily UI. It's a daily UI challenges, and I don't know, there's a little bit of criticism towards it throughout the design community, because I think some people think that it's not reflective of true UX, because you're not thinking of design constraints. You don't have you're not thinking about the user experience. You're really just given a prompt and then you do it. But I personally disagree a little bit on that. I think it's a really valuable tool, especially when it comes to visual design. It really just like teaches you a lot more about like, oh, what type of layout is most intuitive, and what type of visual design, like what type of visual designer am I, because everyone has their own level of creativity and like their own branding to the way they design things too. And just in general, when it comes to like things you're doing, I think people will always have some sort of criticism to say. People will always say this isn't good, like, oh, like don't do this, don't do that. Honestly, just do what you want, like do whatever you think is like valuable to you. So definitely yeah, just if you see any cool design thing, just like go for it.
All right, and then this next question is for those who are kind of either building out their portfolio or kind of getting ready for recruitment or making design a career path. So a common question that I hear a lot, and especially for those who are getting into the product realm or think that product design is, or just any type of design is more on the tech side of things versus art. Like, should I be coding my portfolio site rather than using a website builder? Like, is that okay? Is it better to show my technical skills in that sense? Do people care? So your guys' thoughts on this. And feel free to, any one of you to chime in. Yeah.
I can definitely give my thoughts on it, but truthfully, I'm not like I'm not a recruiter, or like I don't I've never been like a hiring manager or anything. So definitely like take everything I say with a grain of salt. Because I don't have like a ton of like experience in this. But I personally did not code mine, also because I just couldn't code it if I wanted to. I'm not good at coding. But I used WordPress. But I use WordPress with a theme called Simplice. It's actually like Simplice is a like designer theme, but like they built that WordPress theme for designers. But I personally wouldn't recommend WordPress just because it is a little bit more rigid compared to other website builders out there. I would heavily recommend Webflow. The only reason that I did WordPress instead of Webflow when I was doing it was because I had procrastinated so much on building my portfolio before recruitment season that I had like 2 weeks to do it. And WordPress is I think monumentally gives you a lot more freedom. Like there's so much you can do with WordPress, but there's also a heavier learning curve because nothing in life comes for free. So then I just didn't have the time to go through that learning curve at the time, which is why I did WordPress instead. And I still think WordPress is amazing, but there was just a lot of things I wanted to implement into my portfolios in terms of like micro interactions and in terms of just like small like Easter eggs throughout that I really wanted to implement, but I wasn't able to because of the website builder I had used. And so for that reason, I would recommend Webflow. And then in terms of the coding thing, I don't think as a product designer, like unless you are marketing yourself as like a T-shaped product designer who's with like a coding heavy focus, or if you're marketing yourself and like looking for jobs as a UX engineer or like a creative coder, I don't think you have to. I know a lot of people who are product designers who do have coding background and they could code something, actually choose not to, just because they would rather spend their time working on their case studies. And also because even though like to some of the things that people like implementing in their portfolio, such as like the transitions and micro interactions I was talking about before, are kind of difficult to code. So I think some people would just rather put it like focus their time elsewhere in terms of their portfolio. But yeah, I've never heard of anyone like being like anyone getting a negative reaction to one way or another. It's more just like what you're comfortable doing and like how much time you're comfortable putting into like specific areas of your portfolio building.
Nice. And Alex, I don't know if you have one of your own, but anything to add?
Yeah, I have a very similar opinion on that as well. Personally, I attempted to make my own. Oh my gosh, it was a very humbling experience. So let me say I quickly shifted over to using Wix. They have, I think, like 3 different levels of customizability. There's a base Wix, and then there's a Wix editor that offers a little more customizability. And then there's Velo, Wix Velo. I personally used Velo, and it's really nice, and it does let you customize certain elements. They do, however, I think the main language that you can use to customize, I believe, is JavaScript and the Velo API. But it's really not that difficult to learn, and they have a lot of resources that you can do, a lot of like pre-made modules that you can import as well. So I would say that if you're interested in that, Wix is a really great option. I know some other people like Webflow, I've heard of that, really good things about that. I know some people, depending on what they're trying to display, also use Squarespace, but I would say that it might not be student budget friendly. I don't think they have a free option. I've also heard of Showit being pretty good as well. I would say that was probably heavier more towards if you have like very design focused portfolios though, because I think Showit is originally like a photography portfolio builder, but they have really great customizability on that one as well if you're interested. And I don't believe they have a free option there, but I would suggest looking into that if you want like a long-term withstanding portfolio as well.
Sorry, I just wanted to add one more thing. If you're like really low on time, Notion, like a lot of people actually can build portfolios on Notion, and Notion seems really simple, but you can actually do a lot with it. I can try to find one that I really like and drop it in the chat, but definitely like don't discount Notion. I know it seems like more like an internal tool, but definitely a lot of capabilities. So if you're really low on time or like procrastinate on building your portfolio like me, definitely like a very, very easy to use platform.
Nice. And then next question is about kind of like building out your portfolio. So I always tell people that it's like you're writing your own resume in terms of like which projects you guys choose to display and kind of having an about you section. So it's very much like a website version of your resume, just very tailored towards design. So very briefly, can you guys talk a little bit on like your process in selecting different works and how you guys built your own portfolios and the thought process behind that? And I'll go to Colleen first.
I think I would like to say that I chose, but I think at the time I only had like 3 or 4 projects, so I just put them all there. But I think if now that I have a little more projects under my belt, if I were to choose, I think I would I don't know, I think it depends on like where I am in my life at that point. If I'm using my portfolio, like if I'm not actively seeking freelance roles, or if I'm not actively seeking like or recruiting for an internship or a full-time job, then I would just showcase like what I'm proud of and like what I think like I guess like describes me as a designer best. But if I was like looking for hypothetically, if I was really trying to freelance in like the entertainment space, I think I would choose the projects that are most related to that space. And also like in terms of like hierarchy, the like information hierarchy throughout my site, I would prioritize the ones that are most heavily related, and also just like cross-reference with how recent they are. But I think that like, I don't know, in terms of my current portfolio that's off, it's really just like what I had at the time.
And then Alex, for your portfolio?
Yeah, also similarly to Colleen, at the time when I was first building it, I just kind of threw all my graphics that I had made for Daily Bruin on there. And then later I took them down because I was like, Alex, some of these are kind of ugly. So I had to take them down later. But I would say that nowadays, as I'm kind of restructuring my portfolio now, which is normally I would drop the link, but it's kind of a mess right now. So I'm not going to share it at this point in time. But a lot of the stuff that I like to put on is more on the graphic design side of things. But I like to include projects that show a little bit more the design thinking. For example, one project that I'm kind of wrapping up on now is making playing cards. And I'm building all of that in Illustrator. But what's really nice about that is because it reflects how well you're thinking about certain elements like readability. For example, when you're playing cards and say you're playing a game like Rat Slap, where you have to look at it really, really fast, you want to make sure that your designs are identifiable and are as useful as they are, pretty and aesthetic. So I think designs are a little bit more functional are ones that I'm trying to put on my portfolio. I'd also say that since I'm trying to also build skills in making like motion graphics as well, I've been including some of that too, just so I can kind of, like you said, it's a little bit of a resume. So I want to make sure that I'm properly showing all the skills that I have. So I would say that in that sense, I'm mainly building my portfolio around the skills that I'm trying to develop and the skills that I'm trying to showcase, be that like design thinking or more technical skills like Illustrator or Adobe Animate.
All right, and then that pretty much will wrap up like kind of the general design questions, kind of a lengthy session, but I hope that portion was really helpful for those who are starting out. And so now we're going to dive into like the design, graphic design and product design specific questions especially for those who are, learning as they go throughout this competition. So we'll start with graphic design with Alex. So for you, like, what do you think about when you're working on a graphic? Are there certain elements that you're like, that will make good design? And what do you consider good design? How do you go about with your branding and selecting colors and, pretty much like, what's your thought process when you get a design request?
Yeah, so one thing I would say is that a lot of the graphics I make are, again, through Daily Bruin. And so what I'm making is definitely a very, very text heavy graphic. In fact, I would probably say it's closer to infographics than like just straight up graphic design. So a lot of times when I'm making a graphic, I always examine the text first. Sometimes they come along with the visions that the writer has for it. Usually they're pretty limited, pretty loose in structure. But I would say that a lot of times my graphic does center around the contents of the article. So for example, Daily Bruin has a lot of different sections. I think we have like 15 something sections, which means that there's a lot of different content, a lot of different themes going on. So I guess for a more concrete example, the most recent graphic I made was actually a timeline on Harris. So as you can imagine, like that graphic is not going to have much designy like aesthetic elements because that's not at all suitable to the tone and like the content that we're pushing out. So I think in that sense that kind of shows like my design thinking in that I start with the text that I'm given, I start with the content that I have, and then I will kind of work backwards a little bit from there, because especially in graphic journalism, you really need to be careful like the sentiment that you're portraying through your graphic. And I would also say that in the context of graphic journalism, a lot of times the graphics that you're making are meant to kind of complement the article with it. So in that sense, the design is sort of secondary to the information that is the written information on your graphic. So I would say as I'm making graphics for Daily Bruin, the things that I consider the most heavily would be like readability, accessibility, especially when we're making stuff like pie charts and bar graphs. We want to make sure that they're extremely readable, and that we're also using colors that are not only like very obvious in discrepancy and showing different categories, but they're also accessible from like a color standpoint. There's a lot of really great resources online that you can use to check whether or not your colors are accessible to different degrees of color blindness, which is something that's super important for me. And I'd also say that in terms of like branding and font pairing designs and stuff like that, for when I'm making graphics for Daily Bruin, it is a little bit more limited just because we can't have all like the funky text going on, because readability, accessibility are really like the cornerstone of the design that we're creating. But I would say that moving away from like my time at DB, when I'm making graphics for myself, there's definitely a lot more creative freedom there. And I'd say when I'm working on personal projects, I really like to kind of center it to things that I'm currently interested in, as well as things that are important to me as a person. So I guess you could say when I'm doing things on my own, I'm a little bit of a self-centered designer. But in that sense, when I'm creating those different designs, I really kind of think about what theme I'm going for, not just like, is it like a Christmas theme, Halloween theme, but it's also kind of like, what sort of sentiment do I want to convey? Is this going to be one of those peaceful designs that I want people to have in the background as they do work? Or is it one of those loud and poppy designs that I want people with like a maximalist interior design style to really like? So it really depends on, honestly, it kind of depends on my mood. Again, a little bit of a self-centered designer here. But I would say in terms of fonts and color palettes, a lot of times what I do in my design process is I like to kind of mood board the different inspiration photos I have. I would say that when I am mood boarding, I try not to grab from past graphic design. I would rather grab from pretty much like anything besides graphic design. So like photography, I guess photography is the main one, especially when I'm kind of mood boarding on Pinterest. But yeah, I think designing based off of feeling is very, very fun for me. It's something that I find very rewarding and honestly the most productive. So that's kind of what my design process is like when I'm working on graphics.
Nice. And you mentioned a lot of key terms that I think a lot of designers should take into account, like readability, and a lot of stylistic elements. So I think one of the main issues that designers kind of face is finding balance between, all these different elements, from readability to, making stylistic choices and artistic elements that might make their graphics more interesting. Also, going in the lines of recognizability. So like with, you said, like a holiday themed like graphic, people automatically think of a certain color palette versus maybe like finding or doing something a bit more artistically innovative and creative. So how do you kind of balance, all of these pillars when you're creating graphics, especially for yourself or for other types of work?
Yeah, I think my mentality on that kind of depends what I'm working on. I'll start with if I'm doing graphic journalism for Daily Bruin. I would say there that I don't particularly think, I guess just in general, that designing based on recognizability is a bad thing. I think some people kind of have this negative connotation with it because they're thinking that, oh, if you're designing alongside recognizability, you're basically designing along the lines of something that's already been created. And I understand where that kind of comes from, but I also think that being recognizable really helps when a user is looking for something in particular. So again, this is kind of a little bit more in the realm of graphic journalism. But recently we made, okay, not recently, but last quarter, we made a few infographics on stuff that was going on in Westwater, LA during both Halloween, and then there's a separate one for Thanksgiving. And in both cases, we used color palettes that were a little bit more similar in what you would think for both respective holidays. So for example, for Halloween, a lot of black, purple, orange. And in that case, we did kind of debate a little bit. We're like, oh, those colors are kind of basic. They're a little bit overdone. But we also had to kind of remind ourselves that the reason why we're putting this content out is because we want to show it to people who are interested in finding things to do for Halloween, or kind of maybe they don't even know they want to do stuff for Halloween, but we should just put that thought out there. And a lot of times if we had gone for a really summery color palette or just colors that weren't associated with Halloween, maybe we would have missed some people who either consciously or subconsciously were interested in doing stuff for that event. So I think in the sense of journalism, I don't think it's ever a bad idea. Or I guess maybe I shouldn't say ever, but it's generally not a bad idea to be designing along the lines of recognizability. I would say when I'm doing more personal projects, I do try not to get too wrapped up in design trends, design norms, mainly because it doesn't feel original, and that's just not as fun to make. But in terms of color palettes, I would say that again, for personal projects, it does depend on what I'm going for. But a lot of times, sometimes when you have a color palette, there's obviously multiple colors in them. So if I'm doing something for Halloween, maybe I'll grab some colors that are loosely linked to the holiday. That way it's not blaringly orange, blaringly giving pumpkin 24/7. So that's kind of how I approach recognizability within my graphics.
Nice. And I think pretty much your answer covers almost all the rest of our graphic design questions. So if anyone else has any questions specific to graphic design, feel free to throw it in chat and we can come back to Alex. And then so we'll move on to product design and UX UI design with Colleen. So same question, first question to you. As you're designing a feature or a web page or whatnot, what's your design thinking process when you are given a certain product to work on?
I do think that it depends a lot on the scope of the project, and also just the type of product you're working on, whether it's mobile or web. I think, I guess I'll answer this question more on hypothetically, you're given a new feature to either redesign or roll out, when there's an existing product and an existing design system. In that case, I think the design constraints and also the engineering constraints will be laid out for you already. If you're working with a PM, they will communicate very clearly with you what can be done, what can't be done. But more that said, I think it's also very important before you start anything to have conversations with your PM and also with your engineering team or the specific engineer assigned to this launch or this rollout, to talk about the exact constraints, because I actually made a really big mistake during my first job at Stanford, in which I didn't communicate with the engineers at all, and I just did whatever I wanted to. I was like, oh, this looks fun, yeah, I'll do this, and then when it was rolled out, it actually looked completely different from what I had envisioned it to be. And then when I did finally communicate with them afterwards, I realized that it was my completely my fault and completely my mistake for not realizing that there were so many engineering constraints in place that made it so like a lot of the things that I wanted to implement just like actually couldn't be done. And it was a waste of my time, it was a waste of their time, it was waste of like everyone's time and money. So definitely like that was a big mistake. So I think that's like the first thing, which is just recognizing the constraints you have. And when I could say constraints, there's a lot of like different things I refer to. Constraints can include like engineering constraints. So basically like just what your engineering team is able to do, just the time that your like PM and that this group is able to put onto this specific project, just in terms of like time frame with that, and just how much effort they're able to put there. And then also just in general, just constraints in terms of like most products will already have an existing design system. So there's always going to be existing components and stuff. So there's just you can't like be like me and just decide to like create whatever you want. Like there's already a lot of like framework in place with a lot of projects. I guess in terms of my personal design process, I personally really, because I originally did fall in love with like user research, I really enjoy the ideating phase of things. So I really like, I actually really like working in low fidelity. I know some of my friends like don't believe in low fidelity and they're like, yeah, no, like low fidelity is like a joke. But like I personally like really like low fidelity because it's just so much easier. I get really stressed when I have to think about like the actual pixels, and like I get really stressed out, like because when things are in high fidelity, I'm like, it's just really stresses me out to know like, oh, like that this one line is like 1 pixel off, and like it's really like I'm not having a good time. But in low fidelity, like you can really work with like just like literally blocks. So I really like working there and like focusing on like the ideation. And then I also really like to emphasize like just like, yeah, sorry, I think I answered the question.
Okay, it might be a bit loud on my end just because there's public space, people around, so apologize if you hear any noise. Okay, so Colleen, you mentioned a lot of like within the ideation phase, there's a lot of things that you have to balance out. So things like engineering capability, needs of the user versus needs of like the organization, because sometimes like, oh, you're given kind of like this project to work on with like a feature that the company or the firm has a specific idea on like how they envision it to work. And then as you're gaining, you're designing and then you're testing that feature, maybe it's like something totally different that users want, or I don't know, maybe they use it in a totally different way, or maybe they don't need it at all. So in terms of like from the ideation phase to now like the testing and getting feedback phase, kind of how do you navigate all these different opinions, and how do you prioritize like, okay, like how do these opinions fit the must-have requirements of your project versus the nice to haves, and kind of like how do you go about the testing phase in general?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good question that I think like most people during like their first internship or work experience will face. It's really tough because especially like I feel like when you're an intern or when you're like the new hire, especially as a student, at least for me personally, I just also like just being more of a people pleaser. If someone was like, do this, I was like, yeah, I'll do it, and I didn't really like give it a second thought. But like I actually really regret like when I was during my internship, one of my regrets is that my PM had wanted to do a specific thing a specific way, even though that I didn't think it was like the greatest thing to do. Like I thought that the trade-offs that she was making wasn't like ideal from a design perspective, but I actually never ended up voicing it because I was too worried to. But I do think that like it's really important that as a designer, like your job is to communicate like what's best from a design perspective, what's best for the user. And like when I say what's best for the user, like that always exists in terms of trade-offs. There's like as much as we would like to wish that like user experience design means that like we're always designing for the user every single second, it just doesn't, like life isn't that pretty, I would say, like, or not life, but like design isn't that pretty. Like it's really difficult to be completely user centric when like your product has like a business behind it. There's so many like like it needs to profit, right? It needs to do this, it needs to do this, it needs to do this, it needs to follow these rules, it needs to like work under these guidelines. And then like there's also like, oh, like certain products are engineered on specific frameworks. So like we can only do things like within this, you know, we can only do this, we can only use that. And then like there's just a lot of things to think about. So I think that like just recognizing that like you're not gonna like as a designer, quote unquote, like get your way all the time. And just I don't know, I think like something that I heard that was really impactful to me a while ago was like the like when you're working cross-functionally with like engineering and PM teams, the most important thing is just to trust that like everyone knows what they're talking about. And just like when like the three groups come together, it's just like everyone says their piece and then you guys can all work together to find like a compromise. But like as the designer, like for me, the mistake I made was I was just trying to compromise like them, whereas like I wasn't like speaking up about like, oh, like from a design perspective and from a like user-centric and like user intuitive perspective, like making this trade-off is just like I feel like it's sacrificing too much for the user. Like I didn't say that, but like ideally I would have. And just like I really will say that when there's so many things to think about, like I'm talking like those three is just like the most like core cross-functional team, but like usually there's going to be so much more. There's going to be so many stakeholders who want like another completely different thing from you. There's going to be a sales team who wants something else from you. So it's really just about communication. I would say really like I feel like with designers, people always say empathy is most important, and like I completely agree, but that doesn't stop at like empathy with your users. That's also empathy with your engineers and empathy with your PMs, and really understanding like where are they coming from, you know, like they know like 100 things that I don't. And like I don't know, I know it's like always like a like people always joke that like, you know, engineers and designers hate each other, or like designers and PMs hate each other, and like you will end up arguing a lot. Like I don't disagree, like and but the thing is like you should be arguing, you know, it's because it is like through arguing and like healthy communication that you're able to find the best compromise. And just in general just like empathize with one another and trust that like, oh, like they probably have a point, and just working together to find that solution, rather than like, oh, like thinking it all through by yourself and being like, oh, like, you know, like I think that this person did the blah, blah, blah. It's just I feel like communication is just really key here.
Nice. And then last question in terms of product design. And this, I think this is going to be what a lot of people face when they, you know, go from low fidelity and high fidelity mockups into prototyping. So is there a kind of a different approach that you take when turning your design into a prototype? Kind of like what's your thought process there, and how do designers usually navigate it?
I don't know if what I do is normal. I actually don't think it's normal. I think it's kind of inefficient. But I actually don't do high fidelity without prototyping, because for me, like when it gets to like for low fidelity, it's like everything's conceptual, right? It's just like blocks that like I'm kind of like just trying to organize, and I'm trying to figure out the user flow and like IA. But like at the end of the day, it's like it's not meant to be pretty or usable, you know. But then for me, like any iteration of high fidelity, I'll always have prototyped, just because like for me, it's like, oh, like at the end of the day, like something static is never going to really represent a product, though, like in terms of product design, the way something interactive will, even if it's like the tiniest interaction in the world, even if it's just like a click, like I think it does put things in perspectives a little bit better. So I personally like yeah, so for me personally, when I'm moving from like low fidelity to high fidelity, I'll always prototype every iteration I have. It's also like nice most of the time, because on Figma, when you copy paste things to make like a second iteration, the nodes will stay, or the nodes will still exist, even if they do sometimes get a little bit jumbled. So it's not like it's not like you have to do it manually every time. But yeah, I guess that's kind of my thing. And like when it comes to prototyping, especially on Figma, like I won't try to do anything fancy. It's really just to make things interactive. It's just really to be like, when you press this, this will happen. Most of the times, like the CSS or like the CSS behind like sites will already have like a very set component on like how interactions are going to work, in terms of like oh, like, you know, like this, like one artboard to another is going to be 3 seconds, things like that. So like in general, like you can kind of rely on like the existing design system for that. But so for me, I'm really not trying to like create like the most like beautiful parallax effects or anything. It's really just to make things come alive a little bit more.
Oh, right. Okay. That concludes kind of like the product design and graphic design specific questions. And then now we're going to go into kind of like the advice section, kind of like last closing questions. So for both of you, what's kind of something that you wish you would have known as you're getting started? And we'll start with Alex first.
I think for me, I wasted a lot of time because I thought that I had to be really, really good at what I did before I got started on anything. And I think that that's just the worst way to do it, because the only way you're going to get better at something is if you practice it. But for me, I was like, I'm going to wait until to design this thing because I need to get better at using this tool. I need to get better at this type of flow. And I think that that was so just counterproductive. And in hindsight, I just like kick my past self. I'm like, I cannot believe you thought about that. Although we should be a little bit more compassionate towards ourselves, I'm sure. But for me, I think the number one thing I wish I knew was that I don't necessarily have to be good at everything I start at doing. I don't have to be perfect from the get-go, and I shouldn't expect to be perfect at what I do from the get-go either. And I'd also say that one thing, again, that I was kind of hyper fixated on when I was learning Illustrator is that I was trying to get a sense of all these tools and like learn all of them at once before I got into designing. And I think that that was kind of not the best way to do it. If I had to start again using Illustrator or just graphic design, I think I would try to either mimic a design first, because you learn so much like on the job, on the design as you go through. And I think by interacting with the tools and actually creating something like concrete, it's a lot easier to learn about the tools, and it's a lot easier to get more familiar with it. So I think those are the two pieces of advice that I wish I had known when I was starting.
I think for me, like I definitely like very much resonate and want to like emphasize all the things that Alex mentioned. I definitely I feel like especially like we're all so young, like there's no way that like, or I mean like not to discount anyone, but like I just for me like there was no way that you know like 19-year-old me who had like never ever like touched like a software would be like decent at it. It's really just like going at it. And also like I still don't think I'm very good now. It's just like oh like just like we're just all doing our best out here, you know, just do what you can. And then I think a big thing is like with design, I've personally felt and like still continue to feel a lot of imposter syndrome. Design is really subjective, which is for better and for worse, but because it is so subjective, and as someone who like often uses a more quantifiable measure of like self-reflection, sometimes it's, or not sometimes, but like most of the time it's like I don't like any of my work basically. Like I actually like hate all of my work, but it's like I feel like a lot of designers will feel that. But I think definitely just like give yourself a little bit of credit here and there, and just recognize like, oh, like, you know, like maybe, you know, I could have done like these 1 million things better, but I'll do it better next time. And just be proud of like the work you did in the past for the designer you were in that day. Especially like when like I think currently like where we are in our designer like journeys, I think we're all like at the end of the day, like no matter how long we've been in design, we're still like, just as people, we're pretty young. So it's like we're still growing a lot, and these are very much like integral times in our like professional journeys, in which like definitely like treat yourself with like love and respect, and really just like I guess like nurture yourself a little bit more. I think I spent a lot, like I can't count the amount of like times I like had breakdowns because I just hated my work so much. But that's just like so unproductive, and so like you know, like who's that helping, you know, like is your work getting better because like you're crying about it? Not really. But or not that it's not okay to cry about things, but definitely just like treat yourself with love is like what I'm trying to emphasize.
All right, and that's like a perfect segue into our next question, is about handling imposter syndrome, since design is kind of like a type of art, or it can be viewed in an artistic sense. So Alex, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think I definitely have struggled with imposter syndrome for a very, very long time. I still have that problem. And I've realized that I've had it in the past, I've had it in the process of like learning, and I have it even now. So I'm like, okay, if this thing is here to stay with me, and it probably, as I probably think it will, I have to think of, okay, if this is going to be like a static element in my life, what can I do to make it better? And I guess for me, again, like what Colleen says, it's very hard to quantify how good something is in design, especially like for graphic design as well. It's very heavy and falls more towards the art spectrum of things. So I guess for me, what I do to kind of alleviate some of the imposter syndrome is just think about not how far I have to go, but like how far I've come. And I think that sort of backwards reflection has really, really helped me a lot. And I would also say that because I'm always thinking about like how far I've come, it pushes me to be more productive in my present sense. So I think now I still do, and of course probably will always have a sense of imposter syndrome. But the way that I've decided to approach it is if I'm making the most of my time, that's the best that I can do. And honestly, sometimes the only thing you can do. So I guess for me, it's just about being productive. And when I say productive, I don't mean like running yourself to the ground, because doing your best is not the same thing as like killing yourself mentally or physically. So I think kind of like what Colleen said as well, that being a little bit more empathetic toward ourselves, a little bit more compassionate for the person like we are and for the person who kind of took our skills this far as well. I think that's something that I'm really trying to practice, and something that I would really encourage all of us to try and be a little bit better at as we navigate imposter syndrome. So I think that's kind of my take on the end of that.
All right, and then we have a couple audience questions that were submitted to us. So this one I think everyone can relate on is, how do you find the time to work on UX design / your UX career or just design career during school? I know everyone has like a lot to balance. So how do you guys navigate just balancing school and social life, sleep, clubs, and design work? And we'll start with Alex.
Yeah, I'd say definitely that balance is something that I have not perfected yet. Before everybody came in, we were all kind of talking about like, oh my gosh, like being an editor, being in charge of our respective sections and clubs it gets a lot at times. But I think for me, having a fixed schedule of when I'm going to do something well in advance is very helpful. I've realized that that's like very shallow advice. That's like, of course you should time manage. But for me, I was the type of person, especially in high school, to do like full out sprints towards the end of something. Like I was a full out crammer, procrastinator, professional at doing that. But I think for me, what really helped was kind of time blocking events in my day and being like, oh, from this time period to this time period, you can work on this. And that helped me because not only do I have some structure to my day, which I personally need, it also kind of gave me a goal of like, okay, you have to get this done by this amount of time, which for me kind of helped because like I mentioned before, I'm a little bit of a procrastinator. I'm somebody who kind of does pretty well when you light a fire under me and it's like, shoot, you only have this X amount of time. So I think by time blocking, it really helps me. I would also say that there are times when it's difficult to work on your personal projects or side projects because you're either kind of lost motivation or you're just so tired from everything else you're doing, like in life or within school. So what I really like to do is sometimes I just start a new project, even if it's not like something I know it's not going to be finished. I know it's not going to be something that's beautiful. It could just be something, for graphic design speaking, just something very, very small, just a small design that sparks joy and makes me happy in that moment, because any type of like productivity towards whatever skill you're trying to build is being productive, taking the time to wind back and maybe step away from projects that are possibly kind of taking you longer because you've lost motivation. I think sometimes it's nice to hit refresh and start a new project, letting your creative juices flow more naturally. That's something that's really helped me. And I know that's not super like structural advice. It's not like a straight up study habit tip, but I think that a lot of times the reason why I take so long on other work, other projects, is because like this mental drag in my head is just slowing me down too much. So for me, hitting refresh now and then is really important and something that generally keeps up my efficiency and allows me to be, present for everything that I'm a part of. So yeah.
Yeah, it's still, I think, a hard balance that everyone's trying to find. We're all pretty bad at it. So, but Colleen, do you have anything to add on your end?
I think when it comes to design, just a big thing is just choosing projects that you genuinely like are passionate about. I think it'll like for me when I'm doing like, especially when I first started out and I like wasn't involved in anything and I was just doing whatever I wanted. Like my very first project, I was just like, oh, I'm gonna make Royce Hall on Illustrator. Like that was like my first like project. I don't even know, like I don't have the file anymore. I don't know where it went, and like it's not gonna be showcased anywhere. but that was like really, really fun for me, and I just loved like learning something like this. And when I was doing like, for example, when I was doing like design requests for ACM, there was times where I was just like, oh, I really, really want to try this particular design style, so I would take up a design request just so I could practice that. So which is honestly kind of selfish, but I really was just very intentional and like very, I guess, kind of like I don't want to say strategic, but it's just like I really just did the things I wanted to do when it came to design. And because of that, like a lot of it really felt fun to me. It felt like sometimes it felt like design was like how I unwinded from like from school. But then there was other times when I took on a lot of projects that weren't as meaningful to me, or just weren't as like just like maybe were like a little bit outside of my skill set, or a little bit out of like what I was passionate about within the design realm. And then like those projects felt really draining to me. So it's really, I think, a really important thing is just like being intentional about like the projects you choose to take on. I also think that designer burnout is real. Like you know, like there are like months that I don't like design anything, and I'll like I just get so burnt out sometimes from doing so much design that I really like want to not touch like these softwares for a really long period of time. And I do think it's important to take breaks, but I do think also just like um also like after like, you know, like taking some time to rest and recover, just reintroducing these projects into your life in a healthier manner, manner is important. But definitely just remember that at the end of the day, like we're students, and like right now, like we're like, I mean, like we're not like full-time workers anywhere, like, and we're not, you know, like nobody's commissioning us to do like the like actually no, like they could be, and if they are, that's really cool. But like nobody has commissioned me to do any like super important design work. So it's like it's okay to prioritize yourself, and it's okay to prioritize your sleep and your school and like whatever else you have going on, because design will always be there, you know. And like just in general, like just in, I feel like just like do as much as you can when you can, but there's no pressure to have like 500 artboards every single day.
All right, great advice, especially for people who are starting out and feel like they need to do all this stuff to catch up. Okay, so this question is probably going to go to the Colleen. So it's you've done a lot of kind of prototyping and design competitions with a really tight timeline. So someone asked, how can they get data for user research, especially within like a tight timeline for a competition? And also, where can they find complicated iPhone icons like the status bar of a keyboard or etc. when they prototype? I will say for that second question, in terms of icons, there's a lot of free like vectorized resources out there that will save you a lot of time. But especially for like user research, especially when they have a week or like a couple of days to build something out.
I think it depends on the scope of the design competition, but I think in general, design competitions don't expect you to have much user research. So you like really don't have to spend like a ton of time gathering like mass amounts of data. I think in general, design challenges aren't really made to like, they're not really made to test like your ability to like synthesize user research and then like, you know, like applications of that. They're more so to just test your creative problem solving skills and like just or sorry, test isn't a good word, more like I think design challenges are just more an opportunity for you to exercise your creative problem solving skills and really just like have fun with that and be like, oh, it's like the most like fun solution or the most creative like solution I can come up with this. But I don't think that like the judges of any design competition are expecting much data. Like definitely like, you know, like there has to be a certain level of validation to your work, like, you know, like I wouldn't recommend designing something like completely ridiculous, but it doesn't need to be like, oh, every single icon and every single aspect of my site has been completely validated by, you know, rounds and rounds of usability testing. I would more so prioritize just like, I guess, like using your brain and just being like, oh, like, you know, like what are the possible like use cases, what are the possible like user needs here. I think doing like very preliminary research, like maybe doing like a handful of user interviews with people in the in your target audience, and maybe even a survey, but most of the time I think user surveys are more intended to validate a problem statement, whereas in a design challenge, you're already going to be given a problem statement. So like maybe like I don't think you have to do anything like aggressively quantifiable, just maybe a little bit of qualitative research on the side.
Yeah, I will say for design, you don't have to go out and interview like 100 people and get feedback from, that crazy amount. You can just ask a couple friends to see what like they they notice as well. So you have a little bit of like, okay, so there is perhaps something out there that aligns with my solution. And then perhaps later down the line, you can build it out and conduct more research. But especially for a tight timeline like this, pretty much like what you imagine, what you notice, and then see if other people feel the same way, maybe like 5 people, and then you're okay. And then we will try to send out resources for vectorized icons and all that stuff. So that should save you all some time. But before we close the event, does anyone have any other questions for our speakers? Feel free to type them in chat or raise a hand and we can pass the mic to you guys. All right, so feel free to jot down any questions, let everything that our wonderful speakers have said kind of marinate in your head a little bit. And if there's anything that, comes up later, feel free to ping me on Discord or email and I can get an answer for you there as well. But thank you so much for tuning in into our speaker event. Oh, okay, good. Do you ever utilize Mid-Fidelity designs? I think Colleen, you can take this.
I personally haven't, although I think that there could be value to it, but I personally I can't say that I have in my previous projects. I think actually no, I think like the main value that people draw from Mid-Fidelity designs is a very low stakes, low energy way to do usability testing and further like user research validation. I just haven't had any projects that require that. Like, so I personally haven't, but I do think that there's definitely a time and place where it would be useful.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? No problem. Okay, cool. If there's any, again, like I said, any other questions, feel free to ping me. And thank you all so much for tuning in and meeting our wonderful speakers and learning a lot more about design, through other people. I think that's like the most common way that we learn as designers is just talking through other people. So I hope you guys found all of this helpful. And good luck to you guys for the rest of the week for the competition. And I will see you hopefully tomorrow for our next event.